Listen to a conversation between a student and the language lab manager.
Hi. I'm not sure, but, is this the Carter Language Lab?
Yes, it is. How can I help you?
I'm taking first-year Spanish this semester. Our professor says we need to come here to view a series of videos. I think it's called Spanish Working on Your Accent.
Yes, we have that. They're on the wall behind you.
Okay, so can I take the whole series home? I think there are 3 of them.
I guess you haven't been here before.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, you have to watch the videos here. You need to sign in to reserve an open room and sign out the video you need. Just start with the first one in the series. Each video is half an hour long.
So it's a video library, basically?
Yes, but unlike the library, you can't take any videos out of the lab.
Okay. So how long can I use a video room for?
You can sign up for 2 hours at a time.
Oh, good. So I can watch more than one video when I come up here. Is the lab pretty busy all the time?
Well, rooms are usually full right after dinner time, but you can sign up the day before to reserve a room if you want.
The day before. But I can just stop in, too, to see if there's any rooms open, right?
Sure. Stop in any time.
What about copies of the videos? Is there just one copy of each in the series? I don't want to miss out if everyone comes in at once.
Oh, no. We have several copies of each tape in the Spanish accent series. We usually have multiple copies of everything for each video collection.
Super. So how many rooms are there total in the lab?
20. They're pretty small, so we normally get one person or no more than a small group of people in there watching a video together. Actually, someone else from your class just came in and took the first Spanish video in to watch. You could probably run in there and watch it with them. Of course, you're welcome to have your own room, but sometimes students like to watch with a classmate so they can review the material with each other afterwards. For example, if there was some content they didn't really understand.
I guess I'd prefer my own room. I concentrate better by myself, and I don't want to miss anything, And he's probably already started watching it.
No problem. We've got a lot of rooms open right now. When you come in, you sign your name on the list and are assigned a room number. Or if you call in advance, the attendant will tell you your room number. If you forget, just come in and take a look at the list. The videos are over there.
Great. Thanks.
Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Okay, so can I take the whole series home? I think there are 3 of them.
I guess you haven't been here before.
What does the woman imply? Listen to part of a lecture in a poetry class. The professor is discussing medieval poetry.
Okay, so the 2 poems we're looking at today fall into the category of medieval times, which was how long ago?
Almost 1,000 years ago, right?
Yes, that's right.
But, Professor, are you sure these are poems? I mean, I thought poems were shorter. These are more like long stories. I mean, one of them was all about love, but the other one, whatever it's called, the other one, well, it was all about fighting and battles. I mean, can both of them be considered poems?
Well, think back to the very beginning of this course.
Uh-huh.
Remember how we define poetry? In the very broadest sense, we said it's written to evoke, to make you, the audience, have some kind of emotional experience through the use of imagery, some kind of predictable rhythm, and usually, but not always, there's more than one meaning implied with the words that are used. Let's start with chanson poetry first. That's chanson. Chanson poems became popular in Europe, particularly in France, and the term is actually short for a longer French phrase that translates to songs of deeds. Now, they were called songs of deeds because, strangely enough, they were written to describe the heroic deeds or actions of warriors, the knights during conflicts. We don't know a lot about the authors. It's still contested somewhat, but we're pretty sure about who the chanson poems were written for. That is, they were written for knights and the lords, the nobility that they served. The poems were sung, performed by a minstrel, a singer who traveled from castle to castle, singing to the local lord and his knights. Would someone summarize the main features of the chanson poem you read?
Well, there's a hero, a knight, who goes to battle, and he's admired for his courage, bravery, and loyalty to the lord he serves, his country, and his fellow warriors in the field. He's a skilled fighter, willing to face the most extreme dangers, sacrificial, willing to sacrifice anything and everything to protect his king and country.
Okay, now, given that the intended audience for these poems were knights and lords, what can we say about the purpose of chanson poetry? What kinds of feelings was it meant to provoke?
I guess they must have been really appealing to those knights and lords who were listening to them. Hearing the songs probably made them feel more patriotic, made them feel like it was a good and noble thing to serve their countries in whatever way they could.
Good. We've got a pretty good picture of what the chanson hero was like. Now, let's compare that to the hero in the other poem. The other poem is an example of what's called romance poetry. And the hero in the romance poem was also a knight. But what made the knight in romance poetry different from the knight in chanson poetry? Well, first, the purpose of the hero's actions was different. The hero in romance poetry is independent, purely solitary in a way, not like the chanson poet, who was always surrounded by his fighting companions. He doesn't engage in conflict to protect his lord or country. He does it for the sake of adventure, to improve himself, to show he's worthy of respect and love from his lady. He's very conscious of the particular rules of social behavior he has to live up to somehow, and all of his actions are for the purpose of proving that he is an upright, moral, well-mannered, well-behaved individual. You may have noticed that in chanson poetry, there isn't much about the hero's feelings. The focus is on the actions, the deeds. But the romance poetry describes a lot of the inner feelings, the motivations, psychology, you could say, of a knight trying to improve himself, to better himself so that he's worthy of the love of a woman. What explains this difference? Well, digging into the historical context tells us a lot. Romance poetry emerged a few generations after chanson, and its roots were in geographic regions of France that were calmer, where conflict wasn't central to people's lives. More peaceful times meant there was more time for education, travel, more time for reflection. Another name for romance poetry that's often synonymous with it is troubadour poetry. Troubadours were the authors of these new romance poems, and we know a lot more about the troubadours than we do about the chanson authors, because they often had small biographical sketches added to their poems that gave pretty specific information about their social status, geographical location, and a small outline of their career. This information wasn't particularly reliable because they were sometimes based on fictitious stories of great adventure or scrapped together from parts of different poems. But there is enough there to squeeze or infer some facts about their social class. The political climate had settled down enough so that troubadours had the luxury of being able to spend most, if not all of their time, creating, crafting, or composing their love songs for their audiences. And yes, these poems were also sung. Many troubadours were able to make a living being full-time poets, which should tell you something about the value of that profession during medieval times.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
But, Professor, are you sure these are poems? I mean, I thought poems were shorter. These are more like long stories. I mean, one of them was all about love, but the other one, the whatever it's called, the other one, well, it was all about fighting and battles. I mean, can both of them be considered poems?
Well, think back to the very beginning of this course.
Why does the professor say this?
Well, think back to the very beginning of this course.
Listen to part of a lecture in an astronomy class.
Okay, I want to go over the different types of meteorites and what we've learned from them about the formation of Earth and the solar system. The thing is, what's especially interesting about meteorites is that they come from interplanetary space, but they consist of the same chemical elements that are in matter originating on Earth, just in different proportions. But that makes it easier to identify something as a meteorite, as opposed to just a terrestrial rock. So, to talk about where meteorites come from, we need to talk about comets and asteroids, which they're basically made up of debris left over from the origin of the solar system 4.6 billion years ago. Now, I'm going a bit out of order here. I'm not going to go into any depth on comets and asteroids now, but we'll come back later and do that. For now, I'll just cover some basic info about them. Okay, comets and asteroids. It might help if you think of... Remember we talked about the two classes of planets in our solar system and how they differ in composition? The terrestrial planets, like Mars and Earth, composed largely of rocks and metals, and the large gas giants, like Jupiter. Well, the solar system also has two analogous classes of objects smaller than planets, namely asteroids and comets. Relatively near the Sun, in the inner solar system, between Jupiter and Mars to be precise, we've got the asteroid belt, which contains about 90% of all asteroids orbiting the Sun. These asteroids are like the terrestrial planets in that they're composed mostly of rocky material and metals. Far from the Sun, in the outer solar system, beyond Jupiter's orbit, temperatures are low enough to permit ices to form out of water and out of gases like methane and carbon dioxide. Loose collections of these ices and small rocky particles form into comets. So comets are similar in composition to the gas giants. Both comets and asteroids typically are smaller than planets. An even smaller type of interplanetary debris is the meteoroid. And it's from meteoroids that we get meteors and meteorites. Meteoroids are, for the most part anyway, they're just smaller bits of asteroids and comets. When these bits enter Earth's atmosphere, well, that makes them so special that they get a special name. They are called meteors. Most of them are very small, and they burn up soon after entering Earth's atmosphere. The larger ones that make it through the atmosphere and hit the ground are called meteorites. So meteorites are the ones that actually make it through. Now, we've been finding meteorites on Earth for thousands of years, and we've analyzed enough of them to learn a lot about their composition. Most come from asteroids, though a few may have come from comets, so essentially they're rocks, and like rocks, they're mixtures of minerals. They're generally classified into three broad categories: stones, stony irons, and irons. Stone meteorites, which we refer to simply as stones, are almost entirely rock material. They actually account for almost all of the meteorite material that falls to Earth. But even so, it's rare to ever find one. I mean, it's easier to find an iron meteorite or a stony iron. Anyone guess why? Look at their names. What do you think iron meteorites consist of?
Mostly iron?
Yeah, iron and some nickel, both of which are metals. And if you're trying to find metal...
Oh, metal detectors.
Right, thank you. At least that's part of it. Stone meteorites, if they lie around exposed to the weather for a few years, well, they're made of rock, so they end up looking almost indistinguishable from common terrestrial rocks, ones that originated on Earth. So it's hard to spot them by eye. But we can use metal detectors to help us find the others, and they're easier to spot by eye. So most of the meteorites in collections, in museums, they're iron meteorites, or the stony iron kind, even though they only make up about 5% of the meteorite material on the ground.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Anyone guess why? Look at their names. What do you think iron meteorites consist of?
Mostly iron?
Yeah, iron and some nickel, both of which are metals. And if you're trying to find metal...
Why does the professor say this?
And if you're trying to find metal...